Three Films and a Podcast has no claim of ownership on any film footage used in this episode. All film footage is owned in its entirety by the copyright holders and is used solely with the intent of film criticism, commentary, and education under fair use law. And just like every car in Too Fast, Too Furious, this podcast contains spoilers. Enjoy. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Three Films and a Podcast, the show where three friends challenge each other to broaden their cinematic horizons through themed rounds. My name is Ben Lawhorn. I'm here in Salt Lake City, and I am joined as always by Matt Weiler down in Pleasant Grove.
Hello there.
And for the first time ever, that's it. As far as hosts, Tyler is not here. He will be back next week. So hopefully we can keep it together and we don't burn the podcast to the ground without him, but this should be all right. If you're new to the show, welcome. This is, a podcast that we kind of started out as basically we want to be a movie club. The three of us were in a movie club ourselves, and we decided to extend that out and start recording our conversations. And now you're listening or watching us, Spotify, YouTube, whatever. And we just want to kind of invite everybody in for the conversation. So we appreciate you all listening and being here with us. And speaking of being here with us, we have a returning guest. Tom is joining us from the Talking Pictures Trivia Podcast. Tom, thank you so much for coming back and joining us again.
Hello. Yeah, thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here. It's a shame Tyler was taken by extraterrestrials on his way over to the podcast.
Yes,
but
exactly.
It's a fitting kidnapping. And I always ask that your kidnappings be fitting.
Exactly. It's very on brand. So This is good. Apologies to his family.
Tyler went willingly. We want to be sensitive to his family because it's kind of a weird situation, but
yeah.
He just decided to mess up the family room. He's like, I'm out of here. I don't want to clean this up. I'm going to go get some aliens. So.
Oh, that Tyler.
Classic.
We have to have a talk with him.
Yeah.
Whenever he returns, we'll have a talk. So yeah, Tom has been on our episode before, as we talked about. He joined us for the Apu trilogy, which was one of my favorite episodes. We had a great conversation about that. So if you want to hear Tom's Clubhouse questions, you can go back and listen to the Apu trilogy. Or if you're on YouTube, we have our whole Clubhouse section playlist. You can just listen to Tom's section there. So, but yeah, Tyler, like I said, isn't here, but he recently joined you guys, Tom, on Talking Pictures Trivia for the Close Encounters episode, which was a great listen. I really enjoyed a few aspects of it, but mainly that he didn't realize Bob Balaban wasn't Richard Dreyfuss for a majority of the movie. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah.
I love that when that question came up. He's like, wait, he's in this?
Yeah. He was curious why Richard Dreyfuss had top billing since he wasn't in most of the movie, not realizing that, Richard Dreyfuss is not Bob Balaban and vice versa.
Yes. I thought that was great. And also, hopefully we won't have the issue here, but I think because like everyone, it looked like a lot of people watch different versions of it, which we'll get into later. There's we have three versions of this movie. So I think we're all on the director's cut here.
Yes. We're in the version in which you don't see the inside of the spaceship at the end, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we have like three different cuts, I think. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but
yeah, definitely. But yeah, cool. So we're all in the same movie. We're all here. Yeah. So let's just get into it. This is our first episode about Spielberg. This is our newest round. We're talking about Spielberg. We just finished up Kubrick, and before that we why am I drawing a blank? Who did we talk about before Kubrick?
Hitchcock.
How did I forget that? I have no idea.
Al.
I can't let that go on the pod, so I got to restart that. The whole Al. Yeah, we are starting our Spielberg round this month. We just wrapped up Kubrick before, and just before that, we did old Al Hitchcock. We talked about three of his movies. So yeah, we're getting into Spielberg, which I'm excited about. I think it works out great that this is all happening in June. I think, he's the guy that started the summer blockbuster. So I think this is the perfect timing for us to talk about Spielberg. I chose him because he felt like the kind of guy, Jaws is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I feel like I had seen a lot of the hits with Spielberg. I'd seen Jurassic Park, Schindler's List, like all the stuff that Spielberg for. But I realized I hadn't necessarily ventured out too much, especially into his earlier stuff. And Close Encounters is just we have these movies where it's like, oh, I'll get around to that eventually. And you just never do. So this seemed like a great opportunity really just for me to get to watch this movie. That's why I picked Spielberg, because I wanted to watch Close Encounters. So that's why I picked this. We haven't really done it ourselves as far as answering the Clubhouse questions. I think we'll do that at some point, maybe for our like anniversary show. But, you know, to play my cards here, Spielberg would be my desert island director, because I feel like there really isn't, I can't think of anyone who has more of a diverse filmography than Spielberg. You know, we could watch E.T., we could have like the kids movies, the lighthearted Hook, stuff like that. But if we're in the mood to get serious, we can throw on Schindler's List, like we can throw on Amistad, we can throw on Color Purple, you know, like
Lincoln.
Yeah, Lincoln, exactly. Like there's so much. Obviously, he's just done a bunch of stuff, but I also just feel like he has the widest range for what you could want. So yeah, I don't know. That's why I picked Spielberg. I was excited to explore some movies that I hadn't seen before. I'm really happy we watched Close Encounters. I'm going to throw it to you, Tom, just to kind of give a brief explanation, synopsis of the movie, and just I'm kind of curious what your personal experience is with Close Encounters. I don't know if this was the first time you had seen it or not, or, you know, just your experience with the movie.
Sure. So in terms of synopsis, the movie is about extraterrestrials who come and they make contact, not actually a close encounter of the third kind, but, you know, a contact with a number of people. And we're focused on Roy Neary, played by Richard Dreyfuss, who is a man, he's out and about in Indiana. He lives in Indiana, right?
Yeah.
I got that right?
So line worker, something like that.
Yeah. He's a line worker in Indiana, and he's a small town guy with a family. He's married to Terry Garr, or Terry Garr is playing his wife, and these things contact him, and he becomes kind of possessed with wanting to see them again. And you get the impression that they've contacted a number of people and implanted this information in their head, and a few of them are able to realize that there's the Devil's Tower in Wyoming that they're being beckoned to. And so the quest of the movie is Roy and then a woman who lives nearby, Jillian, played by Melinda Dillon.
Yes.
And the two of them sort of team up to go and find whatever is on this mountain, which is the aliens. They kind of go up the mountain to try and find them. And that's the journey of the movie. And my experience watching it, I honestly don't know the first time I saw it. This happens with a lot of movies I've seen. Is that the memory kind of becomes stretched through your life. Which is why, like, movie, like, not a tangent or anything. It is a tangent, but why movies and whatnot are kind of as precious as kind of family memories. Maybe not as precious, but they sort of have that same dimension. They mark great occurrences in your life, or at least important occurrences. But so I can't tell you what my first impression was. I could say watching it for this, and then watching it a few weeks ago for my own podcast. The movie has always struck me, at least, last few times I've seen it, as being not necessarily an allegory, but it's drawing from the same type of feeling of like being touched by God, right? That kind of mystical experience of being touched by God and just having to go up to that force, whatever it is, right? It's very much like like Acts of the Apostles, when the Pentecostal kind of fire comes down and it possesses everyone in that room, and suddenly they're ecstatic. They're kind of filled with this joy that they can't really define or rationalize, but they just need to get to it, or they need to stay with it. That to me was always this movie, because it's not, these people's feelings are never really explained in any kind of detail. And we don't really know why the aliens want them. It seems like they were picked at random, and maybe they're picked at random, and what they're going to do with them seems good, at least peaceful, but we're not quite sure what it is, right? And that's kind of what I always loved about this movie. And I like Spielberg. I don't think Spielberg is a very deep filmmaker. I think he's a great kind of magician. And in our show notes, I sent you Pauline Kael's review of his first film, Sugarland Express, where she's like, this guy's like, he's a prodigy. He's brilliant. He's a technical wizard, which I think is true of this movie and, all of his movies, more or less. But there isn't, even in something like Schindler's List, there isn't this he's not doing like what Scorsese does, right? Scorsese has these kind of different levels that he's exploring. And if you see something like Taxi Driver, there's almost like a thesis that Scorsese is working out. Spielberg is simpler than that, but he is maybe our best magician, our best razzle dazzler in cinema over the last however many years at this point. Jesus, 50 years, I think.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, and the fact that he is the more or less the inventor of the blockbuster through Jaws, and then also this movie made a bucket of money. I think it saved Columbia Pictures more or less.
I think something like that. They only opened it in 2 theaters initially, but like this sold out at the Cinerama for like 6 weeks in a row, and then whatever the theater was in New York for 4 weeks, and then they finally went wide with it after that.
Yeah, there was a huge worry that this wasn't going to do well, and they actually had to borrow money from other studios in order to make it, but it made a bucket, so it keeps that kind of blockbuster thing going. And while we could be kind of critical of blockbusters, that's the thing that people have been chasing for the last 45 years. The fact that Spielberg kind of does the blockbuster probably better than anyone else speaks to his kind of magical skill.
It really does. And I mean, I'm glad you bring that up, because last month we decided to have like an in-person watch party with our patrons. So we rented out a theater, and I was just like, I was dead set on watching Jurassic Park, because like, this is a theater movie. This is something to see on the big screen. I don't know that I saw it in theaters, because I am a very timid moviegoer when it comes to anything that might scare me. So I don't remember seeing it, and I feel like it's a movie I would. But I just knew at this point, like, this is just something you have to see on the screen. And you're right. I think he's a magician with that stuff. Like, I think he's great. It might be surface, it may not, go too far below, the surface as far as meaning or anything like that. I think this movie, maybe as far as the stuff I've seen, maybe talks about that the most, as far as a meaning for Spielberg, because I think it is kind of about, it can be perceived, I guess, as like an artist's obsession. And I know he's talked about like that the Dreyfus character is kind of him, it's just like he gets so obsessed with something and how it affects your family. So this is like, maybe one of the deeper films as far as like having a subtext to what he's talking about. And the fact that he's just like openly said like, yeah, that's me, that was like the obsession with like filmmaking with your career, and how you kind of have to put everything else aside if you really want to get into this. And that was the Dreyfus character. Yeah. As far as, for us, like this is the podcast is like set up essentially for us to watch something for the first time. So this was my first time seeing this movie. I'm again, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm really glad that I picked this and that we got to watch this, because it was something that I always felt like a hole in my Spielberg, filmography of the things I had seen, for how much I enjoy his films. He's just like, it's an easy thing to put on, I think, for a lot of it. Matt, how was this for you? I think this was also your first time. What was your impression of the film? Did it hit you? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I mean, first, I love the rounds where it's everyone's first viewing. It doesn't matter to me if someone's seen a movie before, but it's cool to have everyone kind of experience it for the first time together, more or less. So speaking of Spielberg, touching on Spielberg, I typed out a bunch of stuff trying to explain trying to articulate how my thoughts on Spielberg, basically. And Tom, I feel like you've made it, you articulated perfectly with him being a magician, because so we covered Hitchcock, we covered Kubrick, and those are 2 great directors for different reasons. And they brought like so much to film, and storytelling. And it's like, I like to, with this movie club pod, I like to try to highlight like, what does Spielberg have to offer you? What are the Spielbergisms? What are you getting when you watch a Spielberg? And it is like the magic. And yeah, he's not super deep, but I think there is something to be said with Spielberg and his reverence to filmmaking and storytelling. Because you have blockbuster directors now that do not do the same type of filmmaking that Spielberg does as far as the medium and storytelling. And not to throw Michael Bay under a bus, we don't clown on directors on here, but I feel like Spielberg uses the visuals. He is very much like a big thrills big ideas. Like what can I do to just like wow the audience here?
Yeah.
And I mean, you have Kubrick with 2001: A Space Odyssey. He did like some insane stuff, you know, and from a moviegoer's perspective and like an art, you know, appreciator, it's a significant work of art. Spielberg, I feel like, tried to do the film equivalent of cocaine and just to get people going back, wanting more. And that's what's kind of been fun with Spielberg.
For sure.
And this was my first experience seeing it. Obviously, we've seen this stuff remixed across all types of pop culture. It was fun to finally see the source of some of these things. I'll never forget Weird Al Yankovic carving the mashed potatoes and saying this means something. This is important on UHF.
Yes.
I loved seeing that monkey toy, you know, going crazy when that first I guess encounter happens. I just love in this era, and maybe it's just more of like a Spielbergism, but like just like that big, like excessive messy house. Like he takes like a lived-in scenario and just like times 100. Like things are just pouring off the shelves. It seems in those movies. And also another Spielbergism, I think, and maybe this is prevalent in movies of this era, but I feel like product placement in his movies is pretty gratuitous.
Yeah.
There's just so much of it. You'll have like a really cool shot. It's like, oh, this is a cool shot. And then you'll just see like a Budweiser can right there. It's like, oh,
yes.
Now I want a Budweiser. I don't even drink.
I want a Budweiser.
But I loved the ending with like the spaceship doing that musical, you know, thing. And it reminded me of, I think it was an interview. I can't remember what movie it was about, but Will Arnett was being interviewed. And they were like, somehow they went down this rabbit hole of like, if you were to choose a children's board game to do a movie of, what would it be? And he said, Simon. And at first, like, I mean, now I'm wondering if he was just like giving a reference to this movie.
Yeah.
But basically, he like did his impression of how that movie would go. He's like, yeah, this big thing would come down from space and it'd just be like, boo, 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 boo. And like people would like worship it and like try to follow it. I'm like, oh, that's actually kind of how that movie ended.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome. I really hope I can find that clip. That would be good. Yeah, I feel like I couldn't find the person, but I feel like there is someone that worked on 2001 that also worked on this, or at least like was inspired by it, because I think you can kind of see a little bit of those connections there as far as the detail and the production design. I mean, one of the other things I wanted to kind of get into was, you know, we talk about the Spielberg isms, and really it's like there's always like an optimism, I guess, in his movies. It feels like, you know, like this is, in my experience, like one of the first times that we have a movie with aliens where they aren't bad guys. You know, we're not necessarily like scared of them per se. You know, like, I mean, they're curious, they're leery, but in an interview, he said this was not a science fiction film, but a science speculation film, you know, because he was really big into UFOs growing up and just like kind of wanted to mix UFOs and Watergate. Like, what if the government was covering it up and everything? I was like, oh, that's interesting. And obviously it kind of like evolved. We can see where both of those influences are, but
I was a real sort of UFO devotee in the 1970s and was really into the whole UFO phenomenon from everything I was reading. So it was something for me that was science.
I think Spielberg is always an optimist with his films. And, you know, this one, you know, the end of this movie led into his idea for E.T., which is like, what if we traded someone? What if we gave them Richard Dreyfuss, but they left us almost like an ambassador? Like, what would that alien do here with us now? And that was kind of like the nest egg for coming up with E.T., which I thought was like an interesting thing, you know, I guess arguably one of the best spin-offs ever, you know, doing E.T. obvious.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The optimism is something that is in all of his films, more or less, right? There's always, and you know, that may be part of the appeal of them, or the blockbuster-ness of it is that, you know, we kind of come out on top. This movie is particularly optimistic in the sense that we don't have a villain. Right?
Yeah.
Even the government that's covering it up, they're also kind of behind the eight ball. They don't really know what's happening either, and they're just doing their best. And even when they put out the gas in Wyoming to knock people out,
yes,
it doesn't even kill anything, right? It's just it knocks they won't even kill the cattle. You know,
yeah. When they're driving by and they're laying on the ground, it's like, oh my god, they just shot all the they killed all these cattle. It's like, no, it's just a gas. They're out for 6 hours. They'll be back.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, wow, okay.
Yeah, and it's odd because I mean I didn't pick up that at all. The kind of the Watergate influence here, because it doesn't really treat any of these government officials as villains as you would think a Watergate film or Watergate inspired film would. E.T. does that a little more. E.T. has the military people are, you know, villains that they're trying to stop things, they're trying to control things. Here, you know, they're fairly gentle, and in part because they don't know what they're really doing. You know
exactly.
What I mean? And so that kind of that optimism, that kind of can-do-ness of the characters, but also, you know, the kind of whatever embracing of the human spirit, if you want to call it that, that is in all of his movies. I think it's especially true here, and I think that's probably why there's such a draw, right? There isn't that, you know, there's everything's always hopeful. It always works out hopefully. Even the Holocaust kind of you know works out for
able to have a happy, you know, finish to that movie for sure. Yeah, I think that's an interesting perspective for him. You're right. There's not really a villain. All the government people, they really are just like curious, and it seems like wanting to learn and wanting to connect with them. Whereas in E.T., it's like, let's get him out of here. We gotta get this thing. Like, this is a dangerous whatever. But in this movie, like it's secretive, but they're not like trying to attack them or anything. They just like they're wanting to connect with them and see what happens. So, and I mean, as far as Spielberg isms go, I noticed. It felt like at the beginning of the movie, like he kind of has like his things, you know, like we're talking about like his optimism and things like that. But I think his visual storytelling is amazing, because this was similar to me. You know, Jaws was one of the best accents in the world, you know, that the shark didn't work. It's like, all right, well, we got to rewrite this and we'll just hide it for a lot of the time. And then like when we can get a shot, we will. And, you know, it's not how it was originally supposed to be, but I think that's what made the movie what it is. It made it such like a fantastic movie. And I feel this came out like 2 years later, but that there was a similar theme with this, where, you know, especially that first scene with Richard Dreyfuss in the truck, you know, when he's driving, he's like looking at the map and the car lights come up behind him and he waves them around and they go around. And then we get more lights that come up and he waves them around and they just start lifting up. And, you know, when you step back from you think about the film production, it's like, oh, those are just like 4 lights on a rig. Like there's nothing there. They're just like 4 lights. But then like the beams come in through like the windshield, and then the car starts rotating. It's all these things where we're not seeing anything. Like we don't know what's there, but we still are like having the emotional response of like, oh my God, the aliens are right there with him. You know, this is crazy. This is happening. And that's where I think, you know, like we've been hitting on over and over, but like he's a magician. He's a visual storyteller. He does a great job with that. Same with, you know, I'm putting the notes about Jurassic Park when we first, you know, they're going by the dangerous dinosaurs, and like all it is like leaves shaking. That's all it is. But with the sound design and everything, we are freaking out. It's like, oh my God, there's something in there that could kill you. It's like, no, just shaking leaves. That's it. But I think he's so good at this. I kind of want to talk about that a little more to see what you guys think. Like we've hit on it a bunch already, but like what makes Spielberg movies, like what makes them, like what boxes does he check off every time? Is there like a certain recipe that we can fall into? I think we've really hit on it with the optimism, but I'm just kind of curious what else do you guys think when it comes to Spielberg, you know, that we know we're watching a Spielberg movie. I'll throw it to you, Tom. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Well, the magic trick is set up, right? If we're using this metaphor, the magic trick in that scene in particular, by having the truck that goes around, and then we repeat that again. So he establishes a motive, use a musical metaphor, he establishes a motive. It's the lights and the car goes around. And he does that again. He puts that motive in again, but then he creates a variation, which is now they go up instead of around. And so he's visually telling this story by doing that, by putting out the tracks for us to follow. A lot of metaphors are going into this. And then, you know, we follow them, and then there's a deviation, a change, something like that. And in the end, it's in the end of the picture, there's that musical exchange between these two people, and he allows that kind of build over time. He doesn't really box that, and he allows that to have as much breath as possible.
Yeah.
He's not in a rush, which is interesting, and also true of Jaws. Jaws, the accidental miracle of that, as you're mentioning, is the shark doesn't come up, and so again, we're given this motive. There's something down there. We don't know what it is. We really want to see it, and we become, more and more familiar with the mystery. But at the same time, the tension builds, right? And we're waiting for that closed cadence. We're waiting to see it, to kind of to exhale and move on. And I think that's a lot how the magic works. It's sort of motive variation.
That's great. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, along with that, I think, and obviously there's exceptions to this, but I think when you're sitting down to watch a Spielberg, you're in for an adventure. He's a big adventure person. Like we talked about him basically inventing the blockbuster, and just, I mean, the magic tricks. Like I feel like, I want to say that years back I heard in origin story, if you will, of him like messing around with his dad's camera with like an airplane and tilting it so that it looked like the plane was crashing. And and I feel like that has spilled over into everything that attempts to do. Like what can I do to just like blow this, like create such a crazy experience, for who's viewing this. And I'm thinking about the, let's see, it's when the aliens come back to the house of Barry, and just the way that the lights are just like penetrating through the windows in that house and everything's going crazy. It's like, this is the most bizarre home intrusion I've ever seen.
Really? Yeah.
And it's all with lights. And so it's just, it's crazy that the magnitude he's able to bring to a scene like that with like such seemingly little effects. It's just cool. And similarly, I mean, Jurassic Park, the practical effects are just insane in that movie. And so what he's able to do is just create these great, just fun, I guess, I mean, not to diminish it, but people usually use popcorn as something that's like just surface, like stupid fun. But like, he really makes like that popcorn experience of watching a movie.
Also stupid fun is hard, right? To make good fun, to make a good magic trick is really difficult.
Yeah.
So, I think that the idea of, is something surface or deeper than that? Most American movies are surface, and most American movies aren't very good. Or most movies are surface, and most movies aren't very good. So being, the best magician out there is no slight.
So, this is the magic trick, huh?
Illusion, Michael.
Trick is something a whore does for money.
Yeah, exactly.
It's he is good at what he does, right? And that's kind of what I appreciate. And I appreciate him more than Kubrick even. Because even though Kubrick's going for these kind of, I don't know, profound thoughts, which I'll just admit, I'm not the biggest Kubrick fan. I thought like 2001 is supposed to be this big deep message about alien babies or something, the existence of man, and it's just there isn't a recognizable character in that movie at all, except for Hal, except for the psychopathic computer, and I don't think you would ever get Spielberg either attempting that pretense that Kubrick attempts, but I don't think you would ever see Spielberg forget about people, and that's another quality of his films, even though the characters are not exactly unique individuals. They're not the extraordinary people of history, with possibly the exception of Oscar Schindler. Yet they're kind of nuanced, they're textured when he does it well. And that to me is just far more valuable than like we're going to watch the guy get old and then he's going to become a space baby.
Yes,
and this a profound space baby,
Oh man, when before Matt got involved with this, Tyler and I were doing this ourselves with the movie watching thing, and we did 2001. And I just texted him right after. And it's like, what the hell was that? Like, it was visually amazing. The stuff he pulled off was great. And like, I have no idea what just happened there at the end. But yeah, like, I think that's, you know, to speak to Spielberg, like that's the reason he has a 50-year career. You know, it might be surface, but he's great at what he does and people enjoy that. Matt, you mentioned the aliens showing up at Barry's house, and again, like another interview with Spielberg, he says like when he thinks about Close Encounters, that's the image he gets in his head is Barry opening the door and all that light flooding in. Because an adult, you know, I mean, Spielberg even said like the theme for him for the movie is like a childlike exploration. And when that door opens, he's drawn to it. He wants to go see what it is. Whereas adults are like, shut the door, close the blinds. Like, we got to be safe. You know, it's like, but that's, you know, he wanted to have this kid who just like wants to explore and see what it is. And to tie into that, I mean, that's also what happened with Richard Dreyfuss. Like, I guess he heard about the movie while they were shooting Jaws and he wanted the role, but Spielberg didn't want him to have it because he couldn't see him as anything other than his character in Jaws. And he talked to Steve McQueen, who turned it down because he said he can't cry on demand. You know, he's like, you need to have that. Like, that's in there. You know, Spielberg's like, I'll take it out. He's like, no, you have to have that in there. I just can't do it. And Dreyfuss talks about like he'd walk by his office, be like, hey, Al Pacino's not that great. You know, you may not want him, whatever.
He's not funny.
Yeah, exactly.
He had made the film originally for a man of life experience, like Gene Hackman and something like that, a lifer in the military. And then one day I got the part, and I knew I got the part because I said to Steven, you need a child. It takes a child to get into that obsession, to want to go, and yes, to leave his family.
Dreyfuss is an adult. He's a man baby, so to speak, where he just gets this obsession. He wants to go explore and see.
I mean, along with that, specifically with Richard Dreyfuss, but like getting into sort of what makes Spielberg movies maybe different from other like blockbusters is, and I already mentioned this, like maybe a more reverence to filmmaking and storytelling that you don't get from other blockbuster creators. And specifically with Dreyfuss, there's that scene towards the beginning where he's like, the camera's stuck on his hands and he's like feverishly putting in like film into his camera before it like pans up to his like face. And there's so much information that you're getting very subtly right there about his character that evolves throughout the movie, where he's feverishly carving the clay on his table, running outside, screaming at the sky, and then eventually, you know, filling his living room with just big model. Like he's building this character from the beginning. And you don't get that type of character development in that type of subtle ways, in those shots, in that information given in other blockbusters. And so when you're comparing it to like, I don't know, some of the blockbusters of today that like literally is just, you know, CGI explosions, all that. That's what I feel like probably sets Spielberg apart from those.
I think it's great. Tom, yeah, what were you gonna say, Tom?
Yeah, I was going to agree, and especially how they introduce it's Devil's Tower, right? I have that right. The name of the thing. Yeah. The way they introduce it is he's modeling it, and the camera kind of pans down to the television where there's a news report being released. So it's a way of kind of avoiding exposition and also kind of communicating smoothly the kind of information that needs to be communicated. So it, you know, transitions to him. It's also with his character, that kind of childlike, you know, the childlike Roy, which makes him so different from other blockbuster protagonists. Protagonists tend to be very competent. That's why we like them, especially in blockbusters, you know, even in Westerns, right? It's the guy who draws the fastest. And with this, he's not really that competent at anything. You know, I think in the original cut, he's shown to be pretty good at his job. He's a good lineman. I don't know if anybody watching the movie aspires to that, but you know, but in the cut we watched, that's not even really covered. It's not really that important. And he's also not that articulate a guy. He can't explain what's happening, right? He's not like Brad Pitt in World War Z, where he could look at the thing and before anybody else go like, all right, here's the problem. That wall is not stable. Whatever the problem is that poor Brad Pitt had to deal with when being chased by zombies and an incompetent director. You know, he isn't articulate in that way. He doesn't command the center stage.
Mm-hmm.
And he's also like kind of a doughy guy,
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't really need to see him with a shirt off. But all those factors make him a very unlikely protagonist for such a successful blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you pointed out, that you need a child, it needs to be like a man baby to do this, is that this experience has kind of rendered him dumb. And I don't mean dumb and lacking intelligence. I mean dumb in the sense that he is without ability to express himself and understand what's happening to him.
Yeah.
Right. He's not the person who leads with competence. He is now the person who is in a state of ecstatic distress. And we're watching the ecstatic distress unravel and watching somebody deal with it. And he ends up dealing with it well in the sense that he's the one who succeeds, right? He's the one who gets to the alien spaceship when the other people who are possessed with this knowledge don't make it up there. I mean, Melinda Dillon does, but it's, a little different. She has a different goal.
Yeah. Very true.
Or Melinda Dillon's character, I should say. She has a different goal. But that ends up kind of being part of, I think, the Spielberg, the Spielberg thing is that we actually do get an everyman, and an everyman in every way. It's not an everyman who's also highly competent. It is somebody very much like us, who would be rendered dumb in this situation, who would be rendered, probably exactly like Roy is in this film. Roy, right?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's also part of the appeal of this movie and the appeal of Roy Neary, and the appeal of Spielberg more broadly.
Yeah, I think all those points are super valid. Like, it reminds me again of like another actor that he was thinking of was Jack Nicholson, and that's again where I agree with Stephen King, where it's like you can't cast him because you just assume he's crazy. We talked about this on our Shining episode, but he's there for the interview. It's like, oh, this guy's already losing it, and he hasn't even gotten to the overlook, And so, like, to that point, like, I agree with Stephen King. I get it. Obviously, I still think it's a great movie, and he was wonderful in it. But I get that point. And Dreyfuss said the same thing to Spielberg, where he's like, Jack Nicholson's crazy. Like, you can't cast him for this. Like, people won't believe him. And I think this is perfect for that, because while we were watching this, it's funny, we talked earlier, Tommy brought up that he's very like surface and a magician, because the whole scene where he's like destroying his family room, like getting the trash and throwing it in there and all the plants and taking the chicken wire and stuff, to me, it was like a very condensed version of what The Shining is. Like, this guy is obsessed with something and he is losing his mind. And this is what we're watching, is his downfall right now. But we're watching the Spielberg version of it, where he's not going to kill his family. Like, he's not going that crazy, but he is just so obsessed with something right now that he has like blinders on and he can't focus on anything else. And again, like, that just kind of came back to me of like the Spielberg, he always just has humanity in his films, no matter what, like it's, I mean, it's silly, and I'm just going to say it anyway. Like, one of my favorites of his just as a child was Hook. And even at the end, like, he doesn't die. He just like jumps into the alligator. It's like, oh, so he could still be alive. Like, people don't like, there's always just like some sense of optimism and humanity with his movies. But one of the other things I want to talk about, we kind of hit on it before, like on your episode, Tom, of Talking Pictures. I think, there's 4 of you, and I think you watched 2 versions of the movie, and there's 3 of this movie. There's the theatrical cut. There's the special edition, which Columbia, I guess, financed because, I mean, they wanted to re-release it, and then Spielberg, I think, just didn't get some of the clips that he wanted, like the ship that's in the desert. They didn't get that on the initial theatrical cut. But Columbia would only do it if they would also show the inside of the ship, which Spielberg did not want to do. But he knew this was the only way he was going to get his money. So they did it. They put it out, and then they put out a 3rd version, which is, everything that they reshot and added in. But then Spielberg took out the inside of the ship, which I think was really, really smart. Like, he's talked about this, like, this should be for the people to, come up with their imagination of what it's like inside. We don't need to tell people exactly what it is. But I kind of just want to talk about the bigger picture of director's cuts, and I think we're in the stage now where it kind of feels like if people want to tell a 7-hour story, they'll get like a mini series, or we just had like the Zack Snyder cut come out, where people are like, let him release his version. So like we've been surrounded by it. There's been some famous versions like the Richard Donner's Superman 2, you know, his cut, I don't know how many different cuts there are of Blade Runner now, you know, there's so many. But I kind of just want to see what you guys think about director's cuts. Are there any that stick out to you? Are there any that you feel like have definitely improved what the initial, you know, version was? And just overall, how do we feel about it? You know, there's a lot of pushback on the special edition Star Wars movies because George Lucas just kept like throwing stuff in. He's like, well, the technology didn't exist that I wanted. And so now, you know, we have this elephant creature walking in front of the cantina. It's like, okay, but I don't know that we needed that, you know? So anyways, I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts, Matt. I'm going to throw it to you because I kind of want to see, you know, just having talked about Star Wars, I know you love the Star Wars franchise. I'm just curious specifically what your thoughts are on that. And then just the overall bigger picture of director's cuts.
I mean, the thing that was thrilling about Star Wars when they released the special editions is it felt like it was fun to have something that you already loved come out again that had new things to experience in them. Mm-hmm. At least, I mean, I was young when they came out, with the special editions came out. So there was, I mean, I guess a childlike excitement to like see something new in these movies. And now, like as an adult and having seen, you know, a bunch of movies, I am okay with the, you know, the artist, you know, continuing work on their work with the, I guess with the exception that we still have the ability to view the original version and appreciate the original version, that it stays intact as it was. Because I mean, some people will appreciate exactly what they put out the first time. And I know that to some artists, their work may never be complete. And at some point you have to just finish it. And part of what makes a good director is knowing what to cut, what's necessary, what's not necessary. And I feel like that's sort of what the industry is like when it comes to great directors. Like, oh, all this great footage had to be left on the cutting room floor. And it's like, well, great. Like that'll be great to watch, you know, as an extra feature on my DVD, but I love the product that you came out with. But as far as like re-releasing something with like some tweaks, I think it just depends on, you know, if you like the tweaks or don't like the tweaks. But as long as you can consume the original, then I'm not super against it. I like the idea that Lord of the Rings took, where part of what made Lord of the Rings cool for me, was just the spectacle of seeing this world built out before me. And part of going and seeing that movie was just like losing yourself in that world. And so it was less about like whether it made it a better movie or not, and more about how long can I stay in this world? And like prolonging it. So to me, like the extended versions made sense. I would love to see them bankroll a special edition of Jaws where you go down to his lair and there's a lady shark, you know, in his bed, empty beer cans, Metallica posters on the wall, half-eaten corpses.
Dealing with his day-to-day life. What's going on?
But yeah, I think in that regard, like you said, Ben, showing the inside of the ship or going down to Jaws' lair, seeing like too much information that you don't need takes away from some of the, I guess, the suspense or spectacle of what you are allowed to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, the idea of different versions of something, you know, kind of endlessly being cut, I feel that's particularly modern more than anything. I mean, it's particularly modern, and it also, I think, arrives out of this idea of the auteur theory. There's an author of a movie who is the director who brings this forward, and this person has authority over whatever the material is and so forth. And this is like fairly modern, you know, if you think of like great literature before whatever 1500 or something like that, the idea that somebody would have like authority over a work and they would control the story, and you know, we would see what they really intentionally wanted originally would be like kind of ridiculous. I mean, even most plays in the early modern period, which is certainly after 1500, that just didn't have the author's name, even on the things that were published. And, you know, when you see those same like Shakespeare plays recycled in in the later 17th and 18th centuries. I don't know if you've read 18th century versions of Shakespeare, but what they do is they just rewrite stuff that they don't like, and they, like the Tempest of Shakespeare and the Tempest of William Davenant, who rewrote it, I think in the 1670s, are like there's another the villain has another child, and there's just another the hero has another child, and it's like, oh, I thought people would like this, so we just added it in. The Tate version of King Lear has a happy ending now.
Oh,
it just when and I don't think anybody there really thought of like, well, we need the original. We need to do it the way Shakespeare wanted. It's just kind of like, we know these memes, we know these characters. Let's just do stuff. It's far closer probably to like Arthurian legend, where it's who could ever get an ink and pen could write whatever legend they wanted. There was no idea of canonicity or an authority generated from that. This is it, and it's interesting. A good example of this juxtaposing the past to our time is there's one of the Canterbury Tales, which used to be published all the time, in contemporary editions. Scholars realized it wasn't Chaucer who wrote it, and it is gone. It's not. Nobody publishes it anymore. Yeah, it's just like, well, Chaucer didn't write it. It is not to be read. And it's kind of like the guy who wrote it used Chaucer's name because Chaucer's name was famous. He wasn't interested, presumably not interested in kind of fame. He was interested in getting the damn thing read. And that would usually happen, with kind of poems and what have you, is that you would put the name of an authority there so that people would, like the Song of Solomon. The Song of Solomon is like supposedly written by Solomon. Probably not written by Solomon. It's the guy,
Ghostwriter.
Solomon's Ghostwriter. The guy put it there so that people would see it. And with films, and I think this is probably also a product of copyright, which is an 18th century invention, more or less. What we approach films with, especially if it's like a great director like Spielberg or quote unquote great Kubrick, is that these people have authority over the work in a way that I don't think most people in history thought of work as being invested with an authority. And so when we look at like the various editions of things, there's this kind of game we're playing with the director where we're going like, you are, you're the authority and you're dealing with the system, and the system doesn't really want you to, to do your thing because the system wants what the system wants. And it's kind of a fun ride where we go through all of the, let's say the various editions of Blade Runner, which I'm also not a big Blade Runner fan, but so I've seen a number of these editions, so it's always like, oh God, here we go again. But with that there, it's kind of like, well, what's like the real vision of Blade Runner? What is it that the director wanted, right? As opposed to what he was kind of forced to do or forced Harrison Ford to do, that type of thing. What did the director want? And so this idea of alternate versions, alternate cuts, and all that type of thing, I think is, I think it is in negotiation with an audience that sees the director as an author and an authority over the work. And I think that is very, very particular to movies and is actually spread out, now to books and whatnot. Yeah. You can see with the Star Wars stuff, right? What's canon and what's legend? It's kind of like, none of it happened. What story do you like? Just read that. Yeah. It's all made up. But the idea of like, well, this is canon, this is not canon. George Lucas has endowed, what's her name? Kathleen Kennedy.
Kathleen Kennedy,
yeah. With the power to put canon on top of things. Like she's become a papal figure almost. Yeah. That I think is it's something that's very interesting, but I also think it's particularly and peculiar. It's particularly modern. I'll just say that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that, I mean, also kind of hints or our discussion we had about The Shining and adaptations, and basically like every movie is essentially just like the director's cut of their version of that book or whatever it is they're adapting. So that's a bigger conversation we don't need to get into, but like they're never doing it word for word. They're just doing their version of this thing. So yeah, I agree with both of you guys. I think it's, if we're able to still see the original, that's the ideal. We did a review of the Snyder cut And I think our overall consensus is just like, I'm glad Zack Snyder got to do it. You know, that's great.
Mhm.
I'm glad, like, his is a little different, where it just kind of got obviously taken away at the end because of a tragedy, and his version wasn't put out. So I'm glad that happened. But yeah, I agree. You know, if we can get just more time, you know, in Middle Earth or wherever, it's like, yeah, this is good. There are good versions of it. One thing that surprised me, having not seen this and you know, seeing the title cards pop up, was just how much we saw Francois Truffaut in this movie. I thought it was just gonna be like a in and out one scene kind of thing. You know, I didn't expect him to be there so much, but just because I think we know him obviously so much through his directing work, having recently gone through the Hitchcock round. I watched the Hitchcock Truffaut documentary, where Truffaut and Hitchcock, I mean, Truffaut just got Hitchcock to sit down with a translator, and they just went through every single one of his movies. And Truffaut was just like asking him questions, you know, just like picking his brain, it was essentially like the prototype podcast, you know. It's just like, let's sit down and record this conversation, and maybe people will listen to it someday. And it's like, it's amazing. The book's great. I mean, I learned about it in school, and it's just like, it's just seeing these two people who are like-minded as far as directors go, and just like talking to each other and just really diving deep into what they did. And then so to see Truffaut in Close Encounters made me think like, oh, maybe the roles have kind of been reversed now, where Spielberg, you know, is wanting him to come on and like learn from him. Cause again, this is like kind of his second feature film. Like, I know he did some TV movies with Duel and Sugarland Express, but I think wasn't Jaws his first actual just like theatrical feature film, I believe.
What, did Sugarland Express not get released theatrically? Or was that television?
I thought it was a TV movie that may have gotten put out. No, I guess it was. Yeah, Sugarland was his first. Yeah,
so this would be his third
one. Yeah. So I mean, still obviously very green, very new to like the theatrical directing. But I just kind of thought it'd be an interesting topic to kind of talk about director cameos. You know, we see it a lot with certain directors. Like, again, Hitchcock. He was notorious for that. Pun intended. And then like, you know, Tarantino, who's always, you know, putting himself in his own movies.
What flavor is this?
Knock it off, Julie.
What?
I don't need you to tell me how fucking good my coffee is, okay? I'm the one who buys it. I know how good it is. When Bonnie goes shopping, she buys shit. I buy the gourmet expensive stuff because when I drink it, I want to taste it.
Kevin Smith, things like that. So I just kind of thought it'd be fun if we could come up with some examples of directors who are showing up in like other people's movies, or, you know, in their own as well. I think those are always just like, it's kind of a fun meta, maybe like the first kind of Easter egg that we had in film, you know, was directors showing up in their stuff. So Tom, what directors stick out to you as far as like making an on-screen appearance?
The two that come to mind, just because they're very violent, and they're also in the 70s, is Roman Polanski in Chinatown. Where he comes on, and most of Chinatown, Jack Nicholson has like a scar on his nose. He's a bandage on his nose. And there's a scene where he's trying to break into something, and Roman Polanski cuts his nose open. You know, he plays the character. So it kind of, I imagine that that's sort of the relationship between director and actor in some way.
Yeah, exactly.
A metaphor for it anyway. And so that's like that was a little fun. The haunting one, the scary one, is Scorsese in Taxi Driver. Do you guys remember that? Where it's a brutal scene, but it's basically it's not really part of the central narrative. But Taxi Driver, Travis Bickle has taken this guy played by Martin Scorsese to his apartment, and he's sitting in the back of the cab, and he's looking up, and he's like, "My wife is cheating on me right now," and he has a gun, and he's like, "I'm going to." And he describes the things he's going to do with the gun to her in lurid detail, you know. And he makes Travis Bickle keep the meter on, right? So that he can sit there in the car, and it's a really strange and kind of interesting scene, because it really helps build the environment. That whole movie's about like the madness of New York City. You know, that like Travis Bickle's craziness does not compare to the craziness of the environment he has found himself in. And Scorsese kind of helps make that happen in that cameo with that scene. And he's probably the most disturbed character we meet in that movie. And so those are my kind of two examples, both violent. One's a little more, one's maybe a little lighter. The other one's like
It's
real dark.
something else when you're the craziest character in Taxi Driver.
Yes.
It's like it's quite the bar to set. How about you, Matt? Did you come up with some?
I mean, I recognize Hitchcock, appearing in most of his movies in some subtle capacity. The one that came up fairly recently was I loved seeing Frank Oz in Knives Out. I know he's he's been a voice actor and he's done some other acting credits, but I always loved seeing Frank Oz. So even though he just came in and left, seeing him with that ensemble was just great.
He was reading the will. Is that right? Was that him?
Yep.
Yeah. He was awesome in that. He was super fun. The ones I thought of were just because it's always, I don't know, he's always so interesting to see on screen as Orson Welles in the Muppet movie. Going back to our first round of Unsung Gems, Rob Reiner being the doctor in Mixed Nuts. That was kind of cool. I know he kind of started out as an actor, but I feel like he really became a director later on. Like kind of the same as like Ron Howard. Like we know he started as an actor, but he really, I think, just kind of evolved into mainly just being a director. So I still kind of see that as like a director cameo.
Yeah, for sure.
And then I just had to shout out my favorite one of all time, which is Harold Ramis showing up in Orange County as the dean of admissions, and like them just getting him just like super whacked out on drugs. And one of my favorite lines in any of the movies ever. She's like,
before you do that,
Sean, you're my same height.
That is neat. As they're both sitting down next to each other. Like Harold Ramis is so great. Again, I mean, no, it's like, and it's another one where like actor / director, but that was just one of my favorites ever. I love that. So, I mean, I think it's been an awesome discussion on Close Encounters. I wanted to like kind of open up the floor away from my topics and see if there's anything else you guys wanted to hit on before we wrap it up.
I was curious. We've seen aliens depicted, in many different ways, but I feel like this look that Spielberg depicts kind of lasted the test of time and kind of became sort of the ubiquitous view of what we see as aliens even today, just like the adopted, fantasy version of them. Mm-hmm. And I've seen like earlier like 60s movies where some aliens are just like, they're basically just humanoids with different colored skin and like strange mustaches or whatever. Mm-hmm. Is what was the earliest version of this alien? Is this it? Like, is it like Coke kind of defined what Santa looked like from their advertisements? Is this that for the alien?
Yeah, I think it was Thomas Nash, right? Who did Santa?
Is that right, Matt?
But anyway,
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think he was the cartoonist who I think came up with the Santa Claus, and he also came up with the symbol of the Democratic Party. But anyway, let me see. I'm not sure if like what would you call this? This is the like white alien.
Yeah, I feel like we saw a couple different ones too, because that first one that comes out seems like the adult of the group, with the long kind of wiry arms and stuff. Yeah. And then I saw, just like again, like in reading about it, the rest of them are played by 8 to 12-year-old girls in like gray suits, and he only wanted girls because he felt like they would walk a little bit with I don't know, a better form than a bunch of boys, more gracefully. So I feel like that alien that we see at the end who does like the hand symbols for the music, that felt like a very rough sketch for E.T., with kind of like the elongated face, where we see that. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see, but I don't know. I mean, I think it's a great question. It's definitely something we've adopted.
So I looked it up here. This is Wikipedia, so take that for what it's worth. But it's the gray alien, and the first kind of illustration of it came from an abduction encounter. Barney and Betty Hill in New Hampshire in 1961, who claimed they were abducted, and that they came. They described the alien as that like gray humanoid dome thing.
Yeah,
it's kind of in this movie. There's, the alien figures seem to be a play on that a little bit. But I guess that's where it is. And it's the, And before that, of course, is the Roswell stuff from the late 1940s. But so yeah, I guess this is probably fairly recently, this idea of like the humanoid alien or whatnot. Sure, before then it was, like guys in jumpsuits, or even John Carter, right?
Yeah, right.
John Carter is an alien story from the 19th century, but everybody's just sort of human looking,
I mean, speaking of that, the only thing I want to bring up that I thought was interesting was we get a guy, he has a cameo towards the end, but he is I want to make sure I get his name right. Was it J. Allen Hynek? And he was a UFOologist, like hired by the government to basically, like, for any of these, sightings, they would go and basically try to debunk them or just like explain what it was. And, that's what he did for a living, was like hired by the government and went around and did that. And then at some point he said that there was about 10% of them that he just could not explain at all. Like there's absolutely no reason that it would have happened or anything, like the stories matching up and people have never met, all that kind of stuff. And he basically like accidentally converted himself into believing, in aliens and like this extraterrestrial species, what I thought was really interesting. And he wrote a book about it, and that's where the title for Close Encounters of the Third Kind like comes from, is from him. And he has a cool little cameo at the end there. He's the guy, he's got him in a blue suit. He kind of has like the Colonel Sanders goatee or whatever as he's like walking up in between everybody. But I thought it was cool he had a cameo, but Spielberg said he just kind of like picked his brain as much as he could to kind of find out stuff. But like it's such an interesting job to go around and be hired to try to debunk stuff and then just like come across things that you cannot explain. You're like, I quit. I can't do this job because there are things I just can't, and that's just so interesting to me. I think just that the history of this and just someone who could do that, like, yeah.
It's also interesting that the United States government thought they needed to debunk alien conspiracy theories. Yes. Like, we need a guy on this. This stuff needs to be debunked or else, the commies will win.
Yeah. Oh, well, I mean, this has been awesome. Tom, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I love having you on here.
I love being on here. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Thanks, of course. Yeah. Well, I definitely want to have you back on. And I know I just came on your guys' pod for Shin Godzilla, which was a lot of fun. So that should hopefully be out around the same time as this. I'm not sure exactly when, in June sometime, but
let me see if I could find the date.
Yeah, no worries. That was
talking. I'll find the date.
No, it's fine. That was a really fun episode to do. Matt, I know you're going on their pod coming up, but it's been fun just to work with you guys a lot. I know KJ's coming on later for our Miyazaki for Spirited Away, so that'll be cool. Yeah, I don't know. Appreciate everyone who's been here listening. Tom, do you want to, while you're looking up the date, I don't know if you want to plug the pod and where they can find you guys.
Sure. Our podcast is Talking Pictures Trivia. So wherever you get your podcasts, that's where you'll get this. We also, I run a second podcast, Talking Pictures Trivia B-Side, where we go into the movies in a little more detail, kind of do more theory and philosophy and things like that. You can find us on Twitter at Talking Pictures Trivia, at Talking Studios. You can find me on Twitter at Thomas Lehman 15. And come listen. Ben's been on. Everybody's been on on this podcast. Well, by the time you come on, Matt, everybody will have been on.
Yeah.
So the Shin Godzilla episode. Yeah, it'll be fun. What other ones have you been on, Ben?
I came on for World
Shin
of
Godzilla
Apu.
and Apu.
Yeah, World of Apu. And then Tyler did Close Encounters. So it's a great podcast though. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and Tyler's on the Close Encounters one. So if you want to hear more, if you want to hear Tyler's opinion on Close Encounters, which we couldn't bother to share,
don't listen to the podcast.
Please come on.
Listen to Talking Pictures Trivia.
Listen to ours. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say it's a great podcast. I love listening to it. I think the conceit behind it is awesome. Where it's just like we use these questions, in a trivia format to kind of like spark the conversation. So super fun podcast. Highly recommend it. I assume if you're listening to us, you know where you can find us. Just everywhere at 3 Film Pod. Thank you everyone for participating and joining us, on this adventure, on this journey. yeah, it's been a lot of fun and looking forward to what we've got coming up. So thanks again, Tom, and we will see you next week.
See ya.
Mashed potatoes? My favorite. Terry, you shouldn't have.
George, when are you gonna start taking things a little more seriously? I mean, you've been wandering aimlessly from job to job ever since I've known you. If you could just get that overactive imagination of yours to work for you instead of against you, maybe you could... What are you doing?
This means something. This is important.